Hi, and welcome back. Today's lesson focuses on how to write a treatment plan in the ESDM style. And I know that you all have a lot of experience with treatment plans. And probably you think that A, they're not very useful to you, or B, it takes an awful lot of time. But they are absolutely crucial for work in ESDM. I can't imagine walking into a treatment session without my plan in my hand. For me, a plan defines where I'm going, and it defines how I'm going to get there. We've been talking about the 7 steps for developing this whole set of written plans, and in the last lesson, we talked about the parent interview and the curriculum checklist. Today, we are focused on writing the 12-week objectives. And inside the objectives, we're going to be deciding for each domain in the curriculum how far we really think we can take this child in 12 weeks. One of our goals, as you know, is to teach as much as possible to try to fill in the gaps that children already have. So we want to move them as far along in each level, in each domain, as the child can move. But we want to be very realistic about this. We don't want the parent to be disappointed. We don't want to be disappointed ourselves. And we don't want to be setting out objectives that are unrealistic. So we need to use our clinical judgment to make a best estimate of how far we can get in 12 weeks, given the amount of teaching that we have. How do we do this? We're going to begin by focusing inside one of the domains and thinking about where that zone of proximal development is. You've defined the acquired skills, you've defined a set of partial accomplishments, and you've defined some areas that children cannot pass yet. And so inside each of those domains, you're going to be looking down through the items that are not yet acquired to find a point at which the child should be able to achieve in 12 weeks of good teaching at whatever kind of delivery that you have. Now, what we don't do in ESDM is to simply use the next item as an objective, or to take items exactly from the curriculum and plug them in as objectives. If we did that, we would never be able to move children through the curriculum. There's simply too much to teach. But as you look through a curriculum domain, you'll see the same item come up again and again in slightly more mature versions. And so you're going to think about those little steps as maybe steps towards the 12-week goal and aim down farther in that. You may also see several items that kind of come together well and could be brought into a single objective so that you could be linking several items into one objective. One way of moving through a curriculum domain is to look for items that join together nicely into a single kind of objective. Here's an example in which the therapist has linked together an item involving giving to an outstretched hand, an item involving following verbal directions, and an item involving following verbal gestures. Here's the objective. When an adult provides one of 5 verbal instructions, either with or without a gesture, the child will perform the requested action, like giving, looking, standing up, sitting down, or cleaning up, 80% of opportunities with multiple adults in multiple settings and routines. So you see there are 3 different items that are being joined in one objective, and that's really moving through a lot of space in that curriculum. Another way that we do this is to take items from different domains that fit together well in a single objective. In this particular example, you're going to see a play item, a fine motor item, and an imitation item all brought together in a single objective. When the adult demonstrates toddler toys, the child will repeat the same action, that's the imitation, with several pieces on 10 different toys, that's a play item. Example, stacking blocks, cups, pegs, or rings. 80% of opportunities for 3 consecutive days, 2 or more partners, and settings. There are also fine motor objectives, aren't there, in that? Because those toys are coming from the fine motor domain. And so here you can see how much mileage you can get from one objective covering a number of different skills in 3 different domains. That's what we want to do. We don't want to write hundreds of objectives item by item by item. We want to pull these related skills together in action patterns that make sense for children to do with adults. Now, I've read a couple of objectives through to you, and there's kind of a pattern. You may be picking it up already to them. We write objectives in a very specific format. There are 4 sections typically to an objective, 3 of which are required. The 4 sections are the context in which this skill might be practiced, the antecedent or the stimulus that kind of pushes the child off into the behavior that they're going to display. That's also known as the SD, or the discriminative stimulus in ABA language. The child's behavior, and we want to be talking about behaviors that are functional for the child in everyday life. Those are usually marked by active verbs. And finally, the criterion by which we're going to assess mastery. And for us, criterion is mastery. We don't want to see 50% accomplishment as the criterion. If that's all we think a child can accomplish in 12 weeks, then that objective is set too high. We want to set an objective that the child can fully master, 80% or so of opportunities, and part of mastery is generalization across multiple people, multiple settings, and multiple materials. And so there are the 4 parts: the context, the antecedent, the behavior, and the criterion. Of these 4, the context is not necessary. Sometimes the behavior and the other pieces themselves define when it will be done. Be careful. Lots of times people confuse a context with an antecedent. A context is only a setting. It's not a stimulus. Okay, let's break down a few objectives into these boxes so you can see how the language fits these particular categories and start to get the rhythm of these kinds of objectives. Here's a social objective. During sensory social routines, that's the context. When the adult briefly stops a game, there's an antecedent. Child will spontaneously continue the routine using vocalizations or gaze combined with gesture. There's the behavior. And finally, the criterion. In 3 of 4 pauses during 5 different routines on 3 consecutive days with 2 or more partners. Okay, there's a well-written objective in the ESDM pattern. Let's see how that translates into an expressive communication objective. Context, during treatment sessions. Antecedent, when an adult offers a desired activity or object and then pauses. Behavior, the child will request by vocalizing combined with gaze or gesture within 2 seconds of presentation. Criterion, 10 or more times in a 60-minute session across 3 different activities, people, and settings for 3 consecutive days. All right, are you getting it? You getting the pattern? I'm going to do one more and then you're going to try one on your own. Here's an imitation objective. Context, during a play activity. Antecedent, when an adult demonstrates a conventional play action with an object. Behavior, the child will independently imitate the action, like driving the car, flying the airplane, or stirring a spoon in a bowl. Criterion, 3 of 4 opportunities in 3 consecutive playtimes with 2 or more partners at home and at preschool. Okay, are you ready to try one for yourself? I want you to go back to the curriculum checklist you filled out for little Simon and pick one of the domains in which you've got some acquired items, some partial pass items, and some fail items defined. I want you to try to write an objective for him from the data that you have, thinking ahead about 12 weeks and just making your best guess about what you could do with Simon and his mom, how you could take them along over a 12-week period. So try the format, context, antecedent, behavior, and criterion, and use the ones we've already covered as models. Okay, now you can test yourself on this. Did you need to define a context? It's not necessary, you know. Is the antecedent a measurable event? Could you count the behavior or the stimulus that's making up the antecedent? Behavior. It's not the next curriculum item, is it? I hope you remembered to move down into the curriculum, going as far as you think is reasonable in 12 weeks. And maybe you tried to link a couple of different steps or bundle some items from different domains to make a richer, more interesting activity set inside that objective. Do you think it's achievable in 12 weeks? And could I count that behavior if I was sitting in the room taking data? And finally, the criterion. Did you find mastery, which means that he's successful most of the time without being prompted? And did you include generalization of settings, materials, partners? If so, you've written a beautiful ESDM objective. Congratulations. Now, I imagine that this did not take you a minute or less. You probably had to think a while about how to do this objective. And it is going to feel slow in the beginning. I don't want you to get discouraged about that. You're learning a new way of thinking, a new pattern of behavior, and it does take some thought and practice at the beginning. Once you have done this a while, this becomes very fast. I can think of them and get them down as fast as I can type. And the reason that I think this is so worthwhile is that once you have laid these out, you don't have to do a single other thing for a treatment plan or an objective for the next 12 weeks. You know where you're going, you know where you want to end up, and you know how you're going to measure it. So in the end, taking this much time in the beginning gets you farther and it saves you time. I encourage you to practice it and not get discouraged quickly. This will come. Why don't you share the objective that you wrote with your colleagues who are taking this course? You can take a look at theirs, they can take a look at yours, and you'll get some good ideas for students that you're working with.